Senior Counsel for Global Affairs, former Secretary of State and CIA Director Mike Pompeo. Secretary Pompeo, I wanted to go to you right on this because we talked about the show this week, but it was pretty shocking when President Biden, even the follow-up by the White House to try and make it better. Now we hear from Secretary Blinken that no progress has been made, but when he basically gave a green light for Russia to have some kind of incursion into Ukraine, what was your reaction when he started saying, well, one incursion would be maybe met with less resistance from NATO, and we can't even get NATO together, and a bigger incursion maybe will do something worse?
Jordan, I was really taken aback. This is the worst of diplomacy, to tell Vladimir Putin that it is okay to invade sovereign territory of another country, no matter how much, whether it's an inch or 500 miles, makes absolutely no sense. Even if the reality was that some small something might not have the same impact, presidents can't talk about that. And I've watched the White House press team and the National Security Council off the record try to clean this up. There's no cleaning it up when the commander-in-chief speaks in this way. It also seconded, Jordan, what we've seen before. You remember when the president met with Vladimir Putin and said, well, you can't attack 16 of our industries with cyber attacks, but everything else is good to go. This is clearly a demonstrated policy of this administration to appease authoritarians. They're doing it in Vienna with the Iranians. Yep. They've done it with the Chinese. And I think this is something that Vladimir Putin probably already knew, but saw this week, that the United States wasn't prepared to defend the things that matter most to the United States, Jordan.
Mike, I want to play for you just a little snippet of what President Biden actually said, because I think this is worth pointing out. So we're going to play. This is bite number 6. We'll just play out a little bit. I'll tell you when to edit, but let's go ahead.
Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, et cetera.
No, I want to stop right there. So you can have a small invasion from Russia. That may be okay. So I'm thinking to myself, I know a little bit about Ukraine. I've had some experience with Ukraine, as you remember. And that was called a 4-week trial before the United States Senate, where President Trump was impeached and acquitted, but impeached over a phone call with President Zelensky. Meanwhile, your administration, when you were Secretary of State, provided more munitions, ammunition, and military defense to Ukraine than any previous administration in U.S. history, including other Republican administrations. So I think to myself, President Trump goes through an impeachment process for a phone call. Joe Biden invites Russia into an incursion into Ukraine, and the Democrats are saying nothing.
Jay, I must say, it's incomprehensible to me too, and the outrage that I hear in your voice, I share 100%. I lived this experience, and you don't need to be an American who's involved in the political process to get it. Look at the response from the Ukrainians themselves. Look at Zelensky's response. He says, we're not a minor nation, and there's no minor incursion. He heard what President Biden said too, and he went out to say, no, we're not going to let that happen for our people. We should be with democracies. We should be with Ukraine. The Europeans should take the heavy lift at defending this place. We did it. Our administration, we didn't send 20,000 soldiers. It doesn't make any sense. But we did the right thing to preserve the interest that America have. And to think that the president had a phone call with Zelensky, and the United States House of Representatives spent weeks investigating this and impeaching the president. And now we have this outcome from this president, and Democrats sit silent. That's politics, not security, and it's really dangerous for our country.
Shock and horror is what the Ukraine leadership said when they saw this, Wes.
Yeah, Mr. Secretary, presidents, as you and I and all of us know, have to be very, very discreet with classified and sensitive information, very circumspect in what they signal to the rest of the world. How hamstrung do you think Secretary Blinken was today, your successor, in Geneva? And is there any way that we can clean up the mess that President Biden made earlier in the week?
Wes, without knowing for sure, my guess is that Secretary Blinken had a very short leash there when he was with his counterpart, Foreign Minister Lavrov, who I know well. My guess is he didn't have much space. There wasn't much he could do. My guess is, too, that Lavrov looked at him and said, you say you're tough. You say you're going to put these sanctions on. Your president told us we could conduct a minor incursion. So it was probably a pretty unpleasant conversation, too, and put the State Department in a tough place where their leverage, their ability to demonstrate American credibility was really, really limited.
Is there any way to recover from that?
Yes, just as one can recover from the credibility lost when we had 13 Americans killed in Afghanistan, just as you could recover from handing the Russians a pipeline, there are things that administrations can do. But Wes, I must say, I've just simply not seen President Biden show the wherewithal, the gumption to demonstrate resolve. And I think Xi Jinping, Chairman Kim, who announced this week that he may resume his nuclear testing. I promise you, I can't prove it, but I promise you he wouldn't have done that with President Trump and I in office. The world is watching what's taking place there and can see that America's in a very different place than it was just 366 days ago.
And he made it clear to the world that NATO was not unified, that in fact that they would have to fight about, were the words President Biden used, fight about what they would have to do if it was one of those minor incursions, that they aren't even on board with whatever military action, but also the sanctions that he keeps threatening.
This was a president who said to the Europeans, if I'm elected, we'll be friends, we'll be great partners. You can forget Trump and Pompeo, who were simply troublemakers. We'll all work alongside each other in kumbaya. You could see from President Biden's words that he doesn't have the Germans fully on board. I think that's in spite of the fact that the Germans have a lot more to lose in this than the United States actually does. They should be the ones leading this effort to deter the Russians from an incursion of any size, major or minor, into Ukraine.
I want to, Harry, I was thinking about this. And Mike, we talked about this, the economic impact of all of this too. We talked about these significant sanctions and all of this, but then Europe could be on the other end of the sanctions in a sense with their inability to do business with Russia, which can cause other problems unless this is handled right.
I think that is correct. And part of the issue is an absence of American leadership to basically provide a pathway for the Europeans to support sanctions against Russia.
So what happens then, Mike, if in fact there's this discord in Europe on this?
It all depends, Jay, if President Biden's willing to lead. When we wanted to sanction the Iranians, the Europeans didn't want to go along. We did it anyway, and it was incredibly effective. We crushed the Iranian economy. We killed their GDP. We had them down to $4 billion of foreign exchange reserves. It is possible for America to lead. It is better when our partners and friends and allies come alongside of us, and I hope that Secretary Blinken is able to convince them to do that. Jay, it's worth just 1 second thinking about what the ramifications are. You talked about economics. Were the Russians to move and take Odessa and to close off Ukrainian access to the Black Sea, this has deep economic implications, not only on agriculture and energy, but even more broadly. I think this is what Vladimir Putin is positing. He's got folks in Belarus and along his western edges. It is not too far stretched to imagination something very significant taking place that moves the Russians west, where they would then have Crimea and all of what is today Ukrainian southern boundary, including Odessa.
Final question for you today, Secretary Pompeo, just shifting gears a little bit. It's the March for Life, and it's a March for Life 49th anniversary, but it's a bit different this year because people are awaiting, hopefully, a great decision from the Supreme Court out of the case in Mississippi. We got a small decision out of the Supreme Court today about the Texas case, and there was a good sign there, but a bigger case, a direct challenge to Roe. And people need to say, they keep asking, is this going to be the last march? But in fact, it will be a renewed effort, a redoubled effort for life if the Supreme Court is to do the right thing.
Jordan, my wife always jokes that I never smile and I'm always talking about difficult things. It's true. The world's a pretty challenging place. This one brings me joy. We are on the cusp of a historic change which will provide deep protections for human life and for the dignity of every human being. I feel joy. I am waiting for this decision. And Jordan, your point's right. This won't be our last march. We've been marching for years. We used to host the kids from Kansas who would come in for hot chocolate after the cold march on the Capitol. It was such a lovely thing to see the next generation of pro-life Americans coming to Washington. We'll need to keep it up. The left and the progressives will continue to attack no matter what the Supreme Court does. But I am hopeful that the Supreme Court will bestow a real blessing on these unborn children and that America will be a place that has more respect for human life than it had since 1973.
Yeah, and we're already working, and we have been for a year, on how to then represent states when those challenges become more focused on the states and the states initiate laws. We've been working on that quietly for a year. We'll announce it at the right time, exactly what we're planning. But again, it is a historic opportunity. This could be the last March for Life. It won't be the last March for Life, but the last March for Life under Roe versus Wade, which I didn't think I'd see it. But it looks like we're on the cusp. Mike, we appreciate it as always. Mike Pompeo, of course, former Secretary of State, former CIA director, and our Senior Counsel for Global Affairs. Thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate your insight as always.